Hello, my friends. Before we dive in, tell us, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments so we can see how far these stories travel. And don't forget to subscribe with notifications on so YouTube keeps bringing you more chilling stories like these. I always liked camping near the water. Something about waking up to the lake stretching out in front of me, calm and silver in the morning light, made me feel like the world slowed down for a while. Most people I knew liked the busier campgrounds with bathrooms, picnic tables, and families riding around on bikes, but I always picked the smaller, hidden spots. This particular lake was one I'd only been to once before, years ago with a buddy from work. We had taken his canoe out, fished until sunset, and left the same night. I remembered the place being quiet, not far from a dirt road, but far enough that you rarely saw another person. That was exactly what I wanted now. A weekend with no one talking at me, no phone buzzing in my pocket, no schedules, just me, my tent, and a couple of days to breathe. I pulled off the road late in the afternoon and parked on a patch of flattened grass near the tree line. The lake shimmered through the trees, larger than I remembered, almost mirror still under the heavy summer air. I carried my gear down to the shoreline, picked a clear spot tucked between two pines, and started setting up. The usual rhythm of camping settled my nerves. Tent staked, sleeping bag unrolled, food tucked away in a cooler. I gathered some wood, built a small fire ring, and by the time I sat down in my folding chair, the sun was already dropping toward the far ridge. That's when I noticed the boat. It slid into view from behind a bend in the shore, about 50 yards out. Just a plain aluminum rowboat with a single man sitting at the back. No fishing rod, no visible gear. He wasn't rowing either. The boat drifted smooth as glass, no ripples besides the wake. At first, I thought he might be anchored, just letting the current turn him, but the lake was too still for that. He was moving, slowly, silently, right across my field of vision. I tried not to stare. It wasn't exactly strange to see another person on the lake, but what caught me was how he sat, straight-backed, facing my direction, not moving an inch. I raised a hand, gave a casual wave, the way you do when you pass someone on a trail. He didn't respond, didn't wave back, just kept drifting until he disappeared into the shadows on the other side. I told myself not to overthink it. Some people are unfriendly, some like their space. Maybe he was just another loner like me. By the time the sky turned purple and the first bats started swooping low, I'd forgotten about him. I cooked up a meal, listened to the water lapping against the bank, and crawled into my tent feeling worn out in that good, sun-tired way. But sometime deep in the night, I woke up. It was the sound that did it. A faint scraping, like metal on stone, just outside my tent. I froze, every nerve in my body firing awake. I held my breath, straining to listen. The scraping stopped. For a long moment, all I heard was the quiet lap of the lake. Then, another sound, a hollow thunk, like wood bumping against the shore. I unzipped the flap just a few inches and peered out. Moonlight painted the water silver, and there, not 10 feet from my campsite, was the same aluminum boat. It floated at the edge of the shore, half turned toward the trees. Empty. I didn't see anyone. No one pulling it in, no one climbing out. Just the boat rocking gently, as though it had drifted up on its own. I sat there for nearly an hour, watching, waiting, but nothing happened. Finally, I zipped the tent back up and lay down, eyes wide open until dawn crept in. When I crawled out in the morning, the boat was gone. The shoreline was bare except for a line of faint grooves in the wet sand, like something had been dragged back into the water. I followed them down to the lake, but they disappeared under the surface. I told myself it was weird, but not threatening. Maybe the guy had drifted over during the night, tied off for a while, and left before I was fully awake. Maybe I'd imagined it being empty. Sleep does strange things. Still, I couldn't shake the unease. I spent the day fishing, hiking along the ridge, trying to put it out of my head. By evening, I had almost convinced myself it had been nothing, until the sun went down. Because when the lake turned black under the night sky, the boat came back. I didn't hear it at first. I just noticed the way the water looked different, a faint V-shaped ripple cutting across the surface. Then it slid into view, closer this time, maybe 30 yards out. The man was back in it, sitting exactly as before, spine stiff, head turned toward me. I told myself not to panic. I sat by the fire, pretending to ignore him, heart thudding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I told myself if he rowed closer, I'd call out, ask what he wanted. But he didn't row. He didn't do anything. Just sat there, watching. And then, after what felt like hours, the boat drifted backward into the dark, vanishing without a sound. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I thought I heard the hollow bump of wood against the shore. When dawn finally broke, I stumbled out to find the lake empty again, the surface glass smooth. I should have packed up then and there. But something stubborn in me didn't want to. Maybe it was pride, maybe anger. I told myself I wasn't about to let some creep run me off, so I stayed. That evening, I built the fire higher, more for comfort than cooking. I kept my flashlight on my lap, hand wrapped around the handle as if that thin beam would protect me. Sure enough, just after the sky went black, the boat returned. This time it came closer than ever, 20 yards out. The man's face was still shadowed, but I could see the shape of him now, still and upright. My fire cracked, the only sound besides the faint ripple of water. I snapped. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice harsher than I meant. "What do you want?" The words carried across the water. For a second I thought maybe he hadn't heard. But then slowly he raised a hand, not to wave, just lifted it halfway, held it there, then dropped it again. Something about the gesture chilled me worse than if he'd shouted back. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it straight at him. The beam hit the boat. Empty. No man. Just the boat floating there, rocking gently in the light. I backed up toward my tent, adrenaline screaming through me. I kept the flashlight trained on it, waiting for movement, for something. But the boat just drifted back, slowly, silently, until it melted into the dark again. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat up with my knife on my lap, fire burning low, every crack of the wood snapping my nerves tighter. When the first light hit the trees, I made my decision. I packed everything, tent, chair, cooler, threw it into the trunk. I wasn't sticking around another night. But as I slammed the trunk shut, I froze. On the sand at the water's edge, dragged halfway onto the shore, was the boat. And inside it, a knife. Just lying there on the seat, blade up, catching the morning sun. That was it for me. I jumped in the car, engine roaring, tires spitting gravel as I tore down the dirt road. I didn't look back until I hit pavement. Even then, I couldn't shake the image. That empty boat, that knife gleaming like it had been left there for me. I haven't been back to the lake since, and I don't think I ever will. I don't usually take solo trips. I'm the kind of person who overthinks every little detail, and the idea of being completely alone in the woods always seemed like asking for trouble. But last summer, after a string of exhausting weeks at work, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed a break from the city, the noise, the screens, the people. So I packed my old tent, threw my fishing rod in the trunk, and drove out to a lake I'd only visited once before. It wasn't one of those tourist-heavy campgrounds with kids riding bikes between sites and loud music spilling from RVs. This place was tucked deep in the pines, the kind of spot you only find if you know someone who's been there. The gravel road leading in stretched for miles without another car in sight, and the farther I went, the more it felt like I was slipping out of the world. The lake wasn't big, maybe a mile across, ringed with dark pine trees and patches of cattails near the shore. I found a flat clearing just a few steps back from the water and set up camp. The air smelled sharp with pine needles, and everything was so still, I could hear fish jumping from halfway across the lake. By late afternoon, my tent was pitched, the fire pit was stacked with kindling, and I was sitting in a folding chair with a line cast out into the water. It was exactly what I'd wanted. Quiet, empty, simple. No phones buzzing, no coworkers tapping me on the shoulder, no car horns. Just me, the lake, and the soft creak of my chair when I shifted my weight. It stayed that way until the sun started dipping low, painting the water orange. That's when I noticed the boat. It wasn't much, just a small aluminum fishing boat with a single person inside. They were a good distance away, near the far edge of the lake, but I could tell they weren't fishing. They weren't rowing either. They just sat there, facing my direction. At first, I told myself not to overthink it. People come out here to be alone, sure, but maybe I wasn't the only one who liked the spot. The lake was public land, after all. Still, something about the way they were sitting there, unmoving, got under my skin. They weren't scanning the water or tossing out bait. They weren't doing anything. just watching, or at least it felt that way. I tried to shake it off. I reeled in my line, started a small fire, and cooked up the sandwich I'd packed. By the time I looked back at the water, the boat was gone. I hadn't heard any oars or an engine, but the lake was empty now, rippling with the last of the daylight. That should have calmed me, but instead it made me uneasy. Where had they gone so quietly? Night came fast in the pines. One minute the treetops were glowing red, the next they were black shapes against a starry sky. I sat by the fire until the wood burned down to coals, listening to the soft lap of the lake. Out there, every crack of a branch or rustle in the brush carries farther, and your brain wants to assign meaning to all of it. I told myself it was just deer moving through, maybe raccoons. I even laughed a little at how jumpy I'd become. But when I finally crawled into my tent, zipped the flap, and lay on my sleeping bag, I couldn't stop thinking about that boat. I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, I was wide awake again. No sound, no dream, just my eyes snapping open. I lay there holding my breath, trying to figure out what had pulled me from sleep. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. They were faint, deliberate, moving through the pine needles just beyond my tent. Too heavy to be a raccoon, too slow to be a deer. I froze. Every instinct told me not to move, not to even breathe too loudly. The steps came closer, circled halfway around the tent, then stopped. I stared at the nylon wall inches from my face, half expecting a shadow to fall across it. My heart hammered so hard I was sure it would give me away. Whoever it was stood there for what felt like forever. Then the steps started again, retreating this time, fading into the distance until all I could hear was the blood rushing in my ears. I don't know how long I lay awake after that. Eventually, exhaustion won, and I drifted into a shallow, restless sleep. In the morning, everything looked normal. Sunlight filtered through the trees, the lake was calm, and there were no footprints around my tent that I could see. For a minute, I almost convinced myself I'd dreamed the whole thing. But when I walked down to the water to splash my face, I noticed something that stopped me cold. On the damp sand near the shoreline, there were boot prints. Fresh ones. They came right up out of the water, headed toward my camp, then disappeared where the pine needles began. That meant whoever had been walking around my tent last night hadn't come from the woods. They'd come from the lake. I spent the rest of the morning restless, pacing between the fire pit and the water. I thought about packing up and leaving, but something stubborn in me resisted. Maybe I didn't want to admit I'd been scared off. Maybe I told myself it was just some late-night fisherman cutting across the lake and being curious. Whatever the reason, I stayed. By afternoon, I'd forced myself to relax again. I even managed to catch a fish and cook it over the fire. It almost felt normal until I saw the boat again. This time it was closer. The same aluminum boat, the same single figure sitting perfectly still. Only now they were maybe 200 yards out, near the center of the lake, facing directly toward me again. I stood there on the shore, fish half-eaten in my hand, staring back. My stomach tightened. I raised my arm, gave a little wave, hoping it would break whatever this was. The figure didn't move, didn't wave back, didn't even shift, just sat there, like a statue in the boat. Something inside me broke then. I didn't want to wait around and see what their game was. I packed my gear as fast as I could, throwing things into the trunk without care. By the time I zipped up the tent and hauled it into the car, I looked back at the lake. The boat was gone again. Just like the night before. The drive out felt longer than the drive in. Every bump in the gravel rattled my nerves. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see headlights or another car, but the road stayed empty. When I finally hit the highway, I told myself I'd done the right thing. Better to leave than risk some creep messing with me in the middle of nowhere. But as the miles rolled by, something else nagged at me. If the boat had no engine, and I hadn't heard oars, how had it moved so quickly, so silently? And more than that, why were there boot prints leading from the water to my camp? I should have gone straight home, but after 2 hours on the highway, I caught myself slowing down. The idea of going back gnawed at me. Maybe it was pride, maybe curiosity, but the more I thought about it, the more I wanted answers. So I did something stupid. I turned around. By the time I got back to the gravel road, the sun was low again. The pines cast long shadows, and the air had that heavy stillness that comes before dusk. I drove slowly, scanning the trees, half hoping I'd see another car or camper. But there was nothing, just me, the road, and the lake waiting at the end. When I pulled back into the clearing, everything looked the same. My old fire pit, the flat spot where my tent had been, the water lapping at the shore, no boat in sight. I sat in the car for a long minute, engine idling, debating with myself. Then I killed the ignition, stepped out, and just listened. The place was so quiet it pressed in on me. I didn't set up camp this time. I just walked down to the shore, scanning the water. It was smooth, glassy, catching the fading light. I told myself I'd stay an hour, maybe two, and if nothing happened, I'd leave for good. But as the last sliver of sun dropped behind the trees, I saw movement. The boat, sliding out from the far edge of the lake, almost melting out of the shadows. One figure, sitting perfectly still, pointed toward me. This time I didn't wave, I didn't move at all. I just stood there, staring, my pulse in my throat. The boat drifted closer, slow but steady, cutting across the water without a sound. No engine, no oars. When it was maybe 100 yards out, I couldn't take it anymore. I turned and jogged back to the car, fumbling with the keys. I slid behind the wheel, slammed the locks down, and twisted the ignition. The engine coughed, sputtered, then died. I tried again. Nothing. My hands shook as I jammed the key back and forth. The battery was fine. The lights flicked on when I turned them, but the engine wouldn't catch. That's when I heard it. A splash, faint but close. I looked up. The boat was empty, and from the corner of my eye, movement on the shore. A man, half-soaked, boots squelching on the sand, walking toward my car. I don't know how I did it, but on the next twist of the key, the engine roared to life. I threw it in reverse, gravel spitting, then shot down the road faster than I'd ever driven on dirt. Branches scraped the sides, rocks clanged against the undercarriage, but I didn't care. I just kept my eyes on the narrow trail of headlights and didn't let up until the pavement appeared under me again. I never looked back. I don't know who he was, or how he moved that boat without making a sound, or what he wanted with me out there. But I know this much: I'll never camp alone again, and I'll never go back to that lake in the pines. I've always camped alone. Some people call it reckless, others say it's peaceful. For me, it was both. It was the only time I could get out of my head and away from work, away from people, away from the buzzing noise of everyday life. But the last time I went out, I realized there's a kind of danger that doesn't come from nature itself, but from people who know exactly how to use it against you. It was late September when I drove out toward a forest reserve I'd only been to once before. It was about 3 hours from home, tucked off a winding 2-lane road that eventually turned to dirt. The air was cool, the kind of cool that hinted winter wasn't far. I liked that. The bugs were gone, and the trails were quiet. I parked in a small gravel clearing off a fire road, tossed my pack on, and hiked a couple of miles in toward a small creek. The trees were already thinning with the season, yellow leaves crunching underfoot, branches creaking overhead with every push of wind. The sound of running water was faint but steady, and I found a flat stretch near the creek bank where I set up my tent. I went through the usual rhythm, clearing the ground, staking down the tent, stringing a bear bag, and collecting deadfall for a small fire. I wasn't in a rush. It felt good to slow down. By the time the fire was going, the sky had dimmed into a slate gray, the sun lost behind a wall of trees. That first night was calm, just firelight, the sound of the creek, and a cold breeze. I cooked, ate, and crawled into my sleeping bag. The forest was so quiet, I drifted off faster than I expected. It was the next day that things began to feel wrong. I set out that morning to hike deeper into the woods, pack light, just water and a knife at my side. The plan was to circle out a few miles, follow the creek upstream, and loop back. The ground was damp, the trails narrow, but I liked the feel of it, the silence. The kind of silence that presses in until every stick breaking underfoot sounds like a gunshot. Maybe an hour in, I noticed the first odd thing. Off to the right of the trail, maybe 20 feet in, something caught the light. At first I thought it was just a branch with morning dew, but when I looked closer, I realized it was a thin rope. I stepped toward it, slow. A rope was tied between two trees at about chest height, rough and weathered, but not old, fresh. I ran my hand along it, It had that stiff nylon feel. Someone had been out here. That wasn't unusual, technically. Hunters used these woods, but this wasn't a hunting snare. It wasn't baited. It wasn't positioned where you'd expect game to pass. It was right where a hiker might walk if they stepped off trail. It sat wrong with me. I crouched and followed the rope, tracing it to a thicker section that looped down to the ground, connected to a heavy knot. I knew enough to see it for what it was, a snare trap. Big enough for a person's leg, not a rabbit. I froze there for a while, crouched in the leaves, staring at it. Who sets something like that? For what purpose? I didn't like the answer my brain landed on. I backed away, careful not to disturb it, and returned to the trail. The silence felt heavier now. Every crow call or branch snap felt intentional, like someone was watching. By the time I made it back to camp, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The second odd thing happened that afternoon. I went to fetch water from the creek, filling my bottle and boiling a pot. When I came back, I noticed my tent flap was unzipped. Not wide, just a few inches. I never leave it unzipped. Bugs, drafts, it's just habit. Inside, nothing looked touched. Sleeping bag still rolled tight, pack in the corner, knife on the ground where I left it. But that didn't make me feel better. It made me feel worse. If someone wanted to steal, they could have. If someone wanted to wreck my things, they could have. But they hadn't. They'd just gone through it. Or looked inside, testing me. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in my bag, knife gripped tight in one hand, staring at the thin walls of the tent. Every snap of a twig outside made my heart slam against my ribs. The wind made the fly rustle, and I nearly cut through it by instinct. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the snare might have been old, the zipper might have slipped. But I knew better. The next morning, I packed light again, but I didn't go far. I just wanted to see. I followed the creek upstream the other way, keeping close to camp so I could circle back quick if I needed. Less than a mile up, I found another rope. This one wasn't hidden as well. It was knee-height, stretched across a faint game trail, tied to 2 pines. I followed it with my eyes, and sure enough, it led into the brush where another snare sat coiled. Bigger this time, stronger. It confirmed what I already knew. Someone was setting these intentionally, and not for animals. I crouched in the leaves, staring at it, trying to think. Should I pack up and leave? Hike out fast, straight back to the car? But then I thought about that gravel clearing where I parked, about how narrow that fire road was. If someone wanted to cut me off, that would be the place. I'd have to walk 3 miles out exposed. And if they were already this close to camp, already messing with my tent, did I really think I'd make it that far without them trying something? I went back to camp, my chest tight, my knife in my hand. I didn't light a fire that night. I didn't eat. I just sat in the dark, waiting. It was close to midnight when it happened. I heard footsteps, not the shuffle of an animal, not the light scamper of a deer. Heavy, deliberate. Someone trying to move quiet but not quiet enough. They circled, slow, around the tent, around the camp. Every few minutes, they'd stop and I'd hear nothing but my own breathing. Then the steps again. I stayed still, barely breathing, my knife sweating in my palm. At one point, the sound stopped right next to my tent. I could see the faint shadow of boots through the thin nylon. They lingered there, silent, long enough that my chest started to burn from holding air. Then they moved on. I didn't sleep, not a second. By dawn, I'd made my choice. I wasn't waiting another night. I had to leave. I packed fast, shoving everything into my bag without care. The whole time, I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see someone step out of the tree line. By the time I reached the trail, the sun was breaking through the canopy. My heart was pounding, every sound amplified. And then it happened. One step forward, and the ground yanked out from under me. The rope snapped tight around my ankle, lifting me clear off the ground. I swung upward, my pack slamming against my back, the blood rushing to my head as I dangled upside down from a tree. The snare. I thrashed, clawing at the rope, knife fumbling in my grip. Panic made me clumsy. I slashed and missed, slashed again until finally the blade bit through. I crashed to the dirt, pain lancing through my shoulder, my ankle screaming. I scrambled to my feet, limping hard, eyes scanning the trees. That's when I saw him, a man, 30, maybe 40, standing 30 feet back in the brush, dressed in dull green and brown, face shadowed by a hood, just standing there, watching me. We locked eyes for a second that felt like a lifetime. He didn't speak. He didn't move. Then, without a word, he turned and vanished into the trees. I don't remember much of the run-out. Just pain, fear, and branches tearing at my arms. I don't know how I made it 3 miles back to the car. I just know that when I reached the clearing, the car was still there. The drive back was a blur. Every time a truck passed on the highway, I was sure it was him. Every time I saw a figure on the shoulder, I thought he'd followed me. It's been months since then, and I haven't gone back to those woods. I don't know if the traps are still there, if someone else has stumbled into them, or if the man is still out there setting more. What I do know is this. I used to think the forest was the safest place to be. Away from people, away from the world. Now I know better. Because sometimes the worst thing you can find in the woods isn't a wild animal or the weather. It's someone who's been waiting all along. I've gone camping most of my adult life. Some trips were solo, some with friends, but I've always thought of the woods as quiet places, safe in their own way. That changed during a trip that was supposed to be routine, nothing out of the ordinary. The kind of trip where you expect a few nights by a fire, maybe some fishing, nothing else. Instead, I spent 2 nights listening to something I still can't explain in a way that doesn't make my skin crawl. It started simple, a weekend alone near a lake I'd been to once before. Early spring, chilly evenings, barely any people out that time of year. I drove in late afternoon, parked in a gravel lot off a Forest Service road, and hiked in about 1.5 miles with my pack. The lake was still half frozen near the edges, the air smelling like wet pine and cold dirt. I set up camp on a little rise just above the waterline. Tent, small fire pit, bear bag up in the trees. Nothing fancy. I boiled noodles on the fire, ate fast, and crawled into my sleeping bag just after dark. The woods were dead quiet, the way they get before everything blooms. That first night I woke up around 2 a.m. to a sound I couldn't place. Not a coyote, not an owl. It was sharp, short, and deliberate. A whistle. At first I thought maybe it was the wind, but it came again, 2 short bursts, like someone calling a dog. Except it wasn't close to camp. It was deeper in the woods, carried over the lake. I lay there, heart pounding, telling myself there were other campers. People sometimes whistle at night. It didn't have to mean anything. But I didn't hear voices, no laughter, no fire popping in the distance. Just the whistle, then silence. It stopped after a few minutes, but I stayed awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling of the tent, trying not to breathe too loud. The next morning, I convinced myself it was nothing. Probably a hunter, maybe someone walking back to their truck, signaling to a friend. I brewed coffee, ate, and hiked around the lake. The trails were muddy, the kind that suck at your boots. I didn't see a soul all day. No tents, no footprints fresh in the mud, no boats on the water. That's when it really hit me. I was alone out there. Back at camp, I sat by the fire as the sun dropped. The cold crept in fast, and by full dark, the lake was just a black sheet with a thin rim of ice. I fed the fire slow, bundled in my jacket, and told myself to relax. But around midnight, the whistling started again. Not far this time. 3 short blasts, each one clear, echoing off the water. I froze, spoon halfway to my mouth. It wasn't wind, it wasn't a bird, it was controlled. It was a person. I waited for voices, footsteps, anything, but there was nothing. The whistles came again, farther left this time, like whoever it was had moved along the shoreline. Then they stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the sound itself. I sat there, fire burning low, every nerve stretched thin until finally I couldn't take it. I kicked dirt over the flames, crawled into my tent, and zipped it shut. I lay awake for hours, knife in hand, listening. The whistles didn't come again, but I kept hearing faint crunches, like someone walking slow on frozen ground. The second morning I was shaken but stubborn. Part of me wanted to pack up and leave, but I told myself it was just someone messing around. Kids maybe, or another camper I hadn't spotted. I forced myself through the day, fished at the thawed edges of the lake, hiked farther out along a ridge. The woods felt heavier though, like eyes were on me. I kept looking over my shoulder, scanning tree lines, expecting to see someone just standing there. I didn't. But when I got back to camp, something had changed. The bear bag I'd tied 20 feet up a pine was gone. The rope was still dangling, cut clean near the knot, but the food was missing. I hadn't heard anyone near camp. I hadn't seen a soul all day, yet someone had been close enough to walk right in and cut it down. That night, I didn't build a fire. I sat in the tent in total darkness, heart hammering. Around 1 a.m, the whistles came back, one long, two short. A pause, then an answer, faint but clear, farther out across the water. 2 people, communicating. I clenched my knife, every hair on my body standing up. They weren't lost, they weren't playing, they were signaling each other, and I was sitting right between them. For the next hour, the whistles moved, one set drifting closer, the other circling wide. Every burst echoed sharp in the night air, bouncing off the frozen lake until I couldn't tell distance. I only knew they were getting closer. I held my breath, straining to hear footsteps. At one point, I swore I heard water slapping like a boat paddle dipping gentle. Then silence again, long, suffocating silence. I must have dozed off from sheer exhaustion, because the next thing I knew, pale light was bleeding into the tent. I stumbled out, eyes gritty, throat dry. The woods were still, nothing moved. But down near the lake, pressed into the mud, were footprints, big, boot-shaped, fresh, leading straight to where I'd camped, circling, then back toward the trees. I packed fast, no breakfast, no coffee, tent down, gear shoved into the bag. I didn't care about the mess, I just needed out. The hike back felt like miles longer than it was. Every crack of a branch made me spin, expecting someone behind me. I never saw them, never heard the whistles again. But when I reached the gravel lot, my car sat alone. No other vehicles, no tire tracks fresh in the dirt. It didn't make sense. If there were 2 of them, where had they come from? Where had they gone? I drove the whole way home with white knuckles on the wheel, checking the rearview mirror so often my eyes ached. It's been months since then, but I still hear it sometimes at night when the house is quiet. That sharp, deliberate sound. A whistle. And the worst part is, I know it wasn't random. They weren't just noises in the dark. They were signals. I'd always thought the woods were honest. Weather is weather, trees are trees, animals do what they do for food and shelter. People are the ones who made things messy, deceptions, plans, parts of life you couldn't blame on a storm. I learned that lesson slow and ugly on a weekend that was supposed to be nothing more than a quiet stretch of alone time by a remote lake. The memory of that night sits in my chest like a stone now. Every time I listen back to it in my head, I hear the voice first, small, panicked, impossibly close, calling my name like someone already knew it. I drove out mid-September because the sky had promised cool nights and because I needed to see water that hadn't been a screen for months. The route was familiar, 2 hours of highway, then winding state roads that narrowed and lost their lines, and finally a dirt track that grated under my tires and led to a parking pullout with room for maybe 5 cars. From there it was a mile hike in, a gentle descent through pines and scrub oaks to a crescent of lake I'd found once with a friend years ago. We'd turned back then. The place had always felt private, the kind of shoreline that kept to itself. I carried a single pack, tent, stove, a few cans, my sleeping bag, the little fishing rod that never caught much, but made me feel like a fisherman. I wanted nothing complicated. By late afternoon, I had a small camp tucked between 2 boulders, a short distance above the water where wind couldn't make the tent sing. The light slanting through the furze was that warm, honeyed kind that makes ordinary things look kind. I made coffee, read a half-burnt paperback until the page felt soft, then had a simple dinner and let the fire glow down to coals. Night fell with the kind of quiet that makes a person feel small and roomy at the same time. The lake became a dark glass. The trees around me were so still I could hear the small things, the distant plop of a fish, the heavy breath of a raccoon, the snap of a twig somewhere down the cove. I zipped myself into the tent earlier than usual. A long drive and a day of hiking had taken it out of me. I put my knife under my pillow more from habit than fear and drifted into a sleep that felt like a soft lake itself. I woke for no clear reason, probably water cooling or the way the tent flap sighed in a breeze. It was the sort of wakefulness where you're not sure if you actually opened your eyes or are still dreaming. The world is thin and you can hear far. That's when I heard it, a voice. It was a child's voice, small and high, like someone imitating a child but with a tremor that suggested it was real. "Mister, please help my leg, my leg!" it called, half a sob in the syllables. The sound came from outside the tent's mesh, shockingly close, maybe 10 yards away, over by a thicket where the trail dipped toward the water. The first pulse of feeling was pure reflex. I unzipped the tent, cold air punching my face, and stared out. The fire was down to embers, the sky scattered with stars, and the lake was a dark stripe. There was no one in the immediate clearing, no little silhouette, no flashlight beam. "Hello?" I called softly. "Where are you?" Silence answered me first. Then, softer and more urgent, the voice called again. "Please, please, I can't get up. I fell down by the rocks." Every sensible part of me cataloged the problems. There were coyotes here. It could be a prank. It could be someone drunk. It could be a trap. But the other part, the part that grew up in a house where neighbors helped each other, flared hotter. A child in trouble needs help. I zipped my fleece over my sleeping shirt, grabbed my headlamp and my small folding saw, I carried it for brush, and stepped out into the dark. The air had that metallic scent that comes before a temperature drop. Breath puffed white in the beam of my headlamp. I moved toward where the voice had come from, following the faint depression of a trail that wound between dead brush and saplings. My boots sank in moss and dried leaves. Sometimes I had to crouch under low limbs. The sound of the voice kept me moving, mixed now with water sounds, a faint tearing, and something else I couldn't place. The rhythm of somebody walking with purpose, but not toward me. I rounded a granite outcrop and stopped so fast my knees protested. The beam of my headlamp caught on a small silhouette near the water, 10 yards out, a child, at first glance, sitting with knees pulled into a fetal position, head tucked down. The sight unclenched something in my chest. I hurried forward, each step making leaf litter crack like a gunshot. "Hey, are you okay?" I called, letting my voice be steady. The child looked up. It was a boy, maybe 8 or 9. He had a thin sweater, jeans that were wet and smeared, and a face I'll never forget. Pale, eyes huge like a trapped animal's, mouth open in a sound that could be a sob or a laugh. My leg," he said, pointing. It's stuck. I fell." I knelt down, hands already reaching for his calf. Nothing felt right. No stones, no overhang. My fingers found a strand of nylon, but also something not right. Under his knee was no tangle of roots. There was a patch of worn grass, and then the ground behind him sloped away to the rocks by the water. He'd have had to have fallen from higher up to end up where he was. "Where did you come from?" I asked. "Where are your parents?" He blinked, eyes too bright in the light. "I was with my grandma. She slipped. She went down the trail." He swallowed hard. "She called me to help, and then He stopped like his words hit a wall. My head did a quick inventory. The nearest house was a mile at least, tucked behind a set of ridges visible only by daytime. The idea of a grandma slipping at night down by those rocks felt possible, but improbable. I told myself the proper thing: stay calm, apply pressure, get him to my tent, call for help in the morning. "Nobody else is out here," he said suddenly. They left me and they said don't move." He shivered. "Please, mister." I kept my hands gentle as I tested his leg. It felt warm, not broken. He was wet but not badly hurt. He could stand if he tried. I could tell by the way he shifted. Still, I decided not to force it. "All right," I said. "I'm going to take you to my tent. You're safe with me right now." He let me help him up. He was lighter than I expected. As we walked back, there was a strange halting quality to his steps, like someone acting out what they'd been told to do. I helped him into the tent and sat him on the sleeping bag, then unzipped my small first aid kit. Pain nitpicked at my shoulder from the hike, but it was manageable. We talked in low voices. He said his name was Jamie. He said his grandma had been on the other side of the rocks and she'd screamed and then she was gone. He kept saying the same lines like he'd been taught a script. "Don't go into the trees. Don't come down. Wait. When people come, they'll make you follow the sound." His fingers twisted in the blanket like worry made of cloth. "Why did you come alone?" I asked. He looked at me like I'd asked a foolish thing. "Because they said to. They said the man will check the boat. He'll call someone. He said don't move until he tells you." The small hairs on my arms prickled. Who had told a kid that? Who was going to check a boat? My brain tried to place it. Smugglers? Drunk trespassers? A poacher? People, not animals, I realized with a thump. "Where are your parents now?" I asked more bluntly. They said they went to the car, Jamie said. They said don't scream. He kept looking past my shoulder out of the tent, eyes scanning the dark as if he expected shadows to shape themselves into faces. I made tea until the stove hissed and gave him a paper cup. He sipped like he hadn't known either the warmth of something or the taste of anything pleasant in a long time. He answered my questions in short sentences. Grandma had a hip that felt bad. They'd come from a campsite a mile around the lake. They'd briefly gone down to see the water, and that was when Grandma slipped. He called for help and said he'd been left there because they were going to check the trail. He said a man had come by and whistled and then walked toward the boat, and then, this was the part where his voice tightened, the man told me to stay. The man said it'll be okay. He kept pointing with his eyes toward the far shore where the black water drank the trees. I thought of the little aluminum skiffs you could rent at tourist lakes, small, slow things. I thought of how easy it would be to tie one off in the dark and walk away. Mostly, though, I thought of the way the kid talked about being told what to do. I slept fitfully that night, half watching the tent wall, half listening for any sound. My mind did the circles that come when adrenaline and care mix. Call the park ranger, get the boy to phone his parents, take him to the car, go to the dock. But there was the small fact I'd neglected to account for. It was night. There was no signal at the campsite, and the boy, for all his talk, was small enough that pushing him toward the car alone felt like leaving him again. By the time dawn paled, I had a plan that was perhaps half courage, half ignorance. I'd get breakfast, take the kid, Jamie, now a name bigger than the small body, and walk the rim trail clockwise. If his parents or whoever they were out there, we'd hear voices. If not, we'd head to the parking lot and call the authorities. It was that simple. Shut it down plan you tell yourself in the morning when your brain has forgiven you for the night's risks. We moved slow. The camp's light made long teeth of the brush. People in daylight reveal more things. Footprints, the scent of smoke, a broken branch where someone had yanked a rope. We passed the flattened patch where Jamie said his grandma had been, and there was no corpse and no blood, just disturbed leaves and a scuff that looked like a drag mark. My feet sank into the moss and my eyes scanned the tree line as if expecting elbows to appear. After a quarter mile, I noticed something small and plastic flared against the soil near an overhang. A cheap watch, the kind kids wore, digital face gone dark. I picked it up and cleaned the dirt from it with the corner of my shirt. On the back, a smudge of something brown, mud or worse. We kept going, and by the time we reached the old dock on the north end of the lake, the picture sharpened. The dock was a narrow plank affair that jutted into the black water like an accusation. Tied to one of the posts was a small aluminum rowboat. It was not anchored properly. Its rope had been looped and tucked rather than knotted. The oars were missing. I looked down into the water and saw small scuffs along the shoreline, the dark smears of silt like someone had dragged a foot through it. I thought about the kid's description, a man, a whistle, a man who checked the boat, checking the boat in the dark so you could say you'd been near shore. I thought about the drag mark. A wash of cold moved through me. Jamie edged closer to the dock and peered into the boat. He made a small sound, relief that wobbled into fear, and then something like recognition. "That's Grandma's scarf," he breathed, pointing. The scarf was a thin knit, blue with white flecks, and it was half fouled in the boat's seat where someone had apparently tossed it. 1,000 things can happen on a lake. People fall, boats swallow them, cold takes a person in minutes. But the method here felt deliberate. The rope untied in a fashion that suggested hurry or practiced hands, the oars missing, the scarf tossed into the boat, the child left where he could be seen but not reached, whistling as a sign. It wasn't an accident. I scanned the tree line as if someone would step out, but it stayed thick and opaque. For a second, relief tried to lift me. Maybe the grandma was simply in the boat, cold but alive, and whoever had taken the oars would have returned for the kid. But then I remembered the watch, the drag marks, the boy's hollow way of saying they said don't scream. We didn't have a phone signal. I couldn't call the ranger. I tried anyway, like a superstition. Nothing, no bars, no ring. "Stay here," I told Jamie. "I'm going to check the boat." He looked at me like I'd asked the moon to fetch him a star. "Don't leave me," he said in a voice too small for the worry in it. "I won't be gone long, I promised. I'll go down and look. If your grandma's there, I'll call someone." I took the boardwalk carefully, the woods slick with dew. The boat rocked gently, the waterline kissing its belly. I climbed down and sat on the edge, hands on the planks. The scarf was damp and smelled faintly of smoke. I reached in and my fingers brushed something else. A small plastic bag, the kind people use to carry pills or a chew. Inside was a scrap of paper folded tight. I opened it with my nail. It was a phone number. Someone's hurried handwriting, digits slashed together. Under the number, a single word: wait. My throat closed. If it was a prank, it was a cruel one. If it was a trap, someone was angling me toward a call I didn't want to make. I stepped back, the dock planks protesting under my weight. "Did you see anything?" Jamie called from the edge of the trees, voice thin. "No," I forced. "Just your scarf. Let's go find the car and get some help." We walked back faster, my muscles tight. The parking lot was empty, but for my car, I fumbled for the keys with hands that didn't quite listen. I slammed the truck door and tried the number on the scrap of paper. It connected twice and went to a voicemail that was full of labored breathing. The voice was distorted, either by distance or intentional muffling. I hung up and felt stupid for calling at all. "How old are you?" I asked Jamie as I drove in circles to get cell service. I had to find a place where the bars appeared on the screen. He told me he was 9. He said his name was Jameson, then corrected himself to Jamie. He hummed songs under his breath like someone trying to count to stay sane. The phone started ringing as we crested a rise where the trees thinned, and I finally had one fat bar. I almost cried out with relief. It was a number from an out-of-state area code I didn't recognize. I answered. A woman's voice snapped harsh through the connection. "Where are you?" she said. "Is that my grandson?" "Yes," I said. "He's with me. There's someone missing, possibly a woman, an older woman. We're at Old Birch Cove. We need—" "Don't move," the voice interrupted. "Don't hang up. Stay put. We'll be there." I gave the coordinates as best I could. My mouth felt like cotton. The woman said she was on a road 45 minutes away, but heading fast. She was calm in that way that comes when someone is trying to keep a stranger from panicking, someone who is managing the pieces. I told her what we'd found at the dock. The line went quiet for a long breath. "Someone's been using the trails," she said finally. "Don't go near the water. Wait for us. Keep him with you. Do not talk to anyone." We drove back to the pullout and waited. The woman, Jamie's grandmother, or someone who knew her number, arrived with a pair of men who looked like they'd wrestled with a map and lost. They were neighbors in the way country people are, ready, suspicious, efficient. They had a truck with a rooftop light and a two-way radio. They moved like people who had hunted down what the city calls missing folks before. They confirmed Jamie's story with measured questions. He repeated his script. Grandma slipped, man came, man whistled. They said don't move. The neighbors were not naive. One man's face went hard while the other asked calm questions into a radio. They asked me how long I'd seen the kid and what I'd found. I told them about the watch and the number and the scarf. "We'll search the shoreline," one of them said, "and we'll check the trail. You stay with the boy." He looked at me like I'd done something necessary and possibly foolish. Perhaps both. The look in the younger man's eyes told me they'd come across similar schemes before. Strangers who worked the edges of remote parks, who used children as lures for longer cons. The pieces clicked in my head, ugly and practiced. Someone uses a child to hold the attention of a camper, keep them from wandering off, and meanwhile others take things or move people. Or they use the child to get someone to come close to a spot they want cleared. Or worse, they started combing the shoreline. I stayed in the truck with Jamie. He dozed, head on my shoulder, the fever of fear settling into a tired slump. After an hour, the radio crackled. The men returned, faces gone gray. One of them held up a small red rubber boot, the kind toddlers wear, water beading on it. "He's not the only kid who's been left out here," he said. "There's a pair of footprints leading inland. Fresh. We're tracking." They called the sheriff. The sheriff arrived an hour later wearing a uniform too clean for the woods, but with eyes that had the right sort of patience. They took statements. They asked for descriptions. They took the watch and the scrap of paper. They loaded up with quad bikes and dogs. The deputy said they'd search every trail until they found something. We waited until midday, and the deputy returned with a grim set to his mouth. "We found something," he said. "Down by a game trail near the South Ridge. It looks like someone tried to hide a body." I remember the truck bed like a sudden stage. They walked us down to a small hollow where the leaves were dark. A sheet of plastic had been pulled up under some brush, and under it there was a body, an older woman, her clothes rumpled, mouth open and face slack. Her breathing was faint. She was alive, barely, saying nothing. A shawl, blue with white flecks, was twisted around her neck. They packed her up quickly and loaded her into the deputy's truck. He radioed for an ambulance. We spoke too fast after that. Names, phone numbers, timelines. The woman's name was Hortense, the woman Jamie had called Grandma. She was alive but in shock. They called the hospital on the radio and told us she was stable but hypothermic, maybe drugged, maybe worse. She'd been found with bruises and a small puncture wound in her upper arm, like someone had injected something. The deputy's face lost its hard line then and became just tired. "They'd been using kids around here for months," he said quietly. "They set up a pattern. Small groups of people stop by, leave kids at visible points with instructions not to move, and the others target folks who come looking. Sometimes it's money, sometimes it's cars, sometimes they take people out to move them for longer crimes. It's organized." The words landed somewhere cold in me. Organized. It wasn't random. It was a system. The man who'd come with the neighbor's truck, tall, already stripped of his bravado by the day, shrugged. "We've seen a pickup with a camper shell, dark green, been circling where the trails meet the road. Could be our guys." They ran plates, circled, coordinated. By late afternoon there were more deputies, a K9 unit, and an air of the kind of intensity that tightens a town. We waited for a call, and when it came, it was quick and quiet. A neighboring county had detained a suspect with a truck matching the description. He'd been stopped on the interstate for suspicious behavior. Inside the bed they found multiple watches, a set of cheap children's shoes, and a swing line of rope coiled like a belt. They drove the man back like a puppet on a rope. He was mid-30s, face ordinary, which is what made him look worse, the way normal people can make the worst things happen. He was not guilty until proven so. The deputy reminded us, but the evidence was deep enough to hold. Recorded numbers on his phone that matched the scrap, a voicemail to a burner with the exact breathy audio I'd gotten when I'd called, and a jacket with mud and brambles from our area. They asked me to come up to the sheriff's office to identify some of the things taken from the truck. I picked out a pair of small blue mittens and a small, smudged digital watch that looked like the one I'd found. The man said nothing when I pointed. He stared at the floor. We learned the outlines of the group in the days that followed. 3 or 4 men who moved like a loose wave, hitting quieter pockets of the county, leaving kids behind at trails and boat landings to distract passerby and create openings. They'd been doing it for months. They'd taken a camper once and sold it the next day. They'd stolen cash, wallets, the rare GPS device. When things went south, they'd drug and dump anyone who'd gotten too close. Jamie and his grandmother did not want to give testimony beyond the basics. Hortense made no clear statement between tubes and blankets. The deputy told us they'd get more statements later. The man in custody was charged. Whether the system would pin the whole operation on him, or whether he'd be one caught tail in a much larger net, only time would tell. People who live in small places have a long memory and a patience with slow justice. They also know how to read a pattern. We were the ones who had stepped into it. The next week I found myself back in the quiet of my apartment, coffee gone cool on the table, replaying that night like a movie. There were days when I felt small and proud, like I'd done something right by helping a kid who needed hands. There were nights where the image of that man's ordinary face haunted me. Mostly, though, there was a thread of cold that ran through me. The realization that the woods do not always protect you from human malice, and that someone can weaponize a child's voice as easily as they can a knife. I went back once in late October when the leaves had given up most of their color. The lake was a long gray thing under a low sky. There were fewer cars at the pullout. The dock had been reinforced, and the sheriff's office had nailed a sign by the trailhead warning hikers, "Report any unattended children. Do not approach. Call 911." I walked the shoreline alone and found the scarf tucked in the weeds, clean now, washed by the elements, and the kindness of a woman who demanded it be returned to the boy. Jamie and Hortense visited the sheriff's office for a statement later. The boy seemed smaller, as if the terror had hollowed him out a little. Hortense's hands shook when she signed the smallest forms. The deputy said the man had admitted to being part of a ring that specialized in distraction thefts, that they'd used children left on purpose so that good Samaritans would expose themselves. The official language was clinical and distant. For me, the words matched the bruise around Hortense's throat, and the way a child's voice had sounded like an ember thrown into dark. I kept thinking about the voice. It wasn't the whistle or the anonymous call. Those things could be patterns and tactics, but the cadence of that boy's plea stayed with me. Not because it was professional or well-trained, precisely the opposite, because it was real. That's what made it most dangerous, its truth. I've not stopped camping. That would feel like letting them win, but I do not go out with the same soft, open confidence I used to have. I take a radio now, a GPS locator, and I sleep with appropriate caution. I tell friends to watch the edges of their stillness. I tell them to trust the small noises that prick their skin. Better to be called a worrywart than to answer a child's voice with no plan. There are things people do that are ugly and clever, and they find ways to exploit the parts of us that are decent. That weekend at Old Birch Cove taught me two things. First, don't assume that help-seeking is always what it seems. Second, the part of us that answers a cry for help, no matter how it is used, is still the best part we have. I can live with both facts. I'll just carry the memory of that voice with me, and when I hear a child call in the middle of the woods again, I'll move toward it, but with both my hands ready and my eyes wide open. I'd been camping since I was a teenager, but what happened that spring trip broke me of the habit for good. I used to think of the woods as safe, predictable in their dangers. You worried about weather, wildlife, and maybe losing your way. That was it. But after this, I learned there's something far worse than the forest changing overnight. It's finding out that someone has been there, changing it for you. It was late April when I decided to head out for a few nights by myself. Work had been rough, life in town louder than usual, and I just wanted silence. I drove to a state forest I knew well, the kind of place with dirt roads crisscrossing like veins and dozens of pull-off trails that led deeper than most people bothered to go. I parked at a half-empty lot, loaded my pack, and hiked in 2 miles until I found a clearing I'd used before. A small rise with soft ground, ringed by pines, close enough to a creek that I could hear water moving, but not so close that the ground was damp. It felt like coming back to a second home. I set up my tent, got a fire going, and cooked some rice and jerky in a little pot. The first night was quiet. No owls, no coyotes, not even wind. Just a still forest, heavy with the smell of pine sap and old needles. I fell asleep feeling more at peace than I had in weeks. The first strange thing happened the next morning. I woke with the tent unzipped halfway. I never, ever leave it like that. Not only do I hate waking to bugs inside, but I'd zipped it closed before bed. I was sure of it. My pack was in the corner, undisturbed. My boots were where I left them. Nothing looked moved. Still, I felt my stomach turn. I shook it off, boiled water, made coffee, and told myself it had to be me. Maybe I'd unzipped it in my sleep. It had been warm. Maybe I'd wanted air. I went hiking most of the day, following the creek upstream. By the time I returned, the sun was dipping low. My camp looked the same as I'd left it. I forced myself to relax, cooked, and tried to enjoy the fire. But when I crawled into my bag that night, unease gnawed at me. It was the second morning that made my skin crawl. I woke to the smell of smoke. Not my fire, something sharper, acrid, like burnt paper. I scrambled out of the tent and scanned the clearing. There was no fire, but just past the tree line, maybe 20 feet away, lay a small pile of charred sticks. They hadn't been there yesterday. Someone had built a tiny fire right by my camp while I slept. I walked to it slowly, heart hammering. The ashes were still faintly warm. Whoever had lit it hadn't been gone long. I stood there, turning in circles, scanning the woods for movement. Nothing. Just silence pressing in. I wanted to pack up then and there, but stubbornness won out. I told myself it could have been kids passing through or hunters. Maybe they thought I was someone else. Maybe it was harmless. I stayed. That night, I heard footsteps. Not animals. These were heavy, dragging, moving in uneven circles around camp. I killed the fire, crouched in my tent with my knife in hand, barely breathing. The steps would fade, then return from another direction. Whoever it was never came closer than the trees, never stepped into the clearing. Then I heard a low laugh. Just once. Short, muffled, but human. I didn't sleep. The third morning nearly sent me into shock. When I crawled out of the tent, my camp was different. My pack, which I had left inside the tent, was now leaning against a tree outside. My cooking pot, which I'd set by the fire ring, was gone. In its place was a rock the size of my fist. And worst of all, my knife, which I had fallen asleep clutching, was lying on the dirt near the tent door. I couldn't explain it. My bag had been zipped. I hadn't moved those things, but someone else had. Someone had been inside my tent while I slept. I felt sick. I decided to leave. No more stubbornness. I didn't care about food or gear. I just needed out. I stuffed my essentials into my pack, broke down the tent in minutes, and headed for the trail back. My hands shook the entire time. Halfway down the trail, I stopped cold. There in the mud were fresh boot prints, not mine. Heavier, wider, leading the same direction I was going, and spaced alongside them, smaller ones, another person. I couldn't follow them without following whoever made them. My only choice was to cut off trail, heading through brush to make a wide arc. It slowed me down, but after 2 exhausting hours I reached the lot. My car sat alone, exactly as I'd left it, but something was waiting on the hood. My missing cooking pot, blackened from use, placed neat as a trophy. I drove away so fast I almost spun out on the dirt road. The whole way home, I checked the mirror, certain I'd see headlights behind me. It's been months since then. I never went back to that forest, and I never camped alone again, because nothing unsettles me more than realizing someone had been there the whole time, watching, waiting, changing things just enough so I'd know, not hurting me outright, not yet, just letting me understand I was never in control.